Every morning for 13 years, a man in Columbus, Ohio, sat in his truck in a parking lot on Morse Road and prayed the same prayer before his shift started. He didn't close his eyes. It kept them open, pointed at the windshield, at whatever was in front of him, a dumpster, a fence, a stop sign, because he had learned that if he closed his eyes, the image came back too fast. The image was his son's face. Daniel Reeves was 4 years old the last time his father Raymond held him. Raymond Reeves was 31 years old then. He was 44 now. He had a callus on his left palm from 13 years of gripping the same steering wheel on the same delivery route, and he had a photograph in the sun visor of his truck, small, printed on regular paper, creased down the middle, of a boy in a blue jacket standing in front of a chain-link fence. Daniel at 4. The only photograph Raymond had. And every morning before the prayer he touched that photograph once with 2 fingers. The way people touch a wound to confirm it is still there. 640 miles away, in a house on a quiet street in Marietta, Georgia, a 17-year-old named Daniel Reeves sat at a kitchen table every morning before school and ate cereal and looked at his phone. It had a habit his adoptive mother, Carol, had noticed for years. He would sometimes pause mid-scroll, set the phone face down on the table, and look at the window, not at anything outside it. Just at the glass. Carol had never asked him what he was seeing. She thought she knew. She had known since the day Daniel was placed with her. He was 5 then, 1 year after the separation, that there was a room inside her son that she was not allowed to enter. She had furnished everything around it. She had loved him completely and deliberately and without condition for 12 years. But that room had stayed closed, and she had respected the door. And every morning she watched her son look at the window, and she said nothing, and poured him more orange juice, and loved him through the glass. Neither of them knew the other's morning ritual. Neither of them knew they were both, every single day, reaching toward the same silence from opposite ends of it. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. Raymond Reeves had lost his son to the family court system in the spring of 2011. The circumstances were not simple, and Raymond never tried to make them simple. He had been 29 when Daniel was born, working irregular construction jobs, living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus with his girlfriend Tamara, who was Daniel's mother. Tamara had a substance problem that neither of them had named out loud yet. Raymond knew. He didn't know what to do with what he knew. When Daniel was 3, Tamara's problem became impossible to not name out loud, and a welfare check led to a home visit, and the home visit led to a case file, and the case file led to a removal hearing. And Raymond Reeves, who had never missed a day of being Daniel's father, who had been at every pediatric appointment, who had learned to braid his son's hair because Tamara was sometimes not able, sat in a courtroom and was told that due to the instability of the household, Daniel would be placed in protective custody while the situation was assessed. The assessment took 8 months. In those 8 months, Raymond found steadier work, moved to a cleaner apartment, completed every parenting class the court required, submitted every document his caseworker requested, and called the Child Services office every single week. Each caseworker was changed twice. The second caseworker lost a document Raymond had submitted, a character reference from his employer, and the case review was delayed by 6 weeks because of it. Raymond resubmitted. The third review found the apartment acceptable, but flagged Raymond's work schedule as insufficiently stable for primary placement. Raymond asked what stable meant. The caseworker gave him a document that described a minimum income threshold. Raymond was $400 a month below it. He took a second job. By the time he met the threshold, Daniel had been in his foster placement for 14 months, and the court found that disrupting the placement was not in the child's best interest. Raymond's visitation rights were granted, supervised, bi-weekly, at a county facility with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs. It went every time, without fail, for 11 months. Then Tamara, who had entered and exited 2 treatment programs, called Raymond from a payphone and told him she was leaving Columbus. She didn't say where. She asked him to stop fighting the placement because she said it was hurting Daniel to be in the middle. Raymond asked her how she knew what was hurting Daniel. She hung up. Raymond sat in his apartment that night and did not sleep. In the morning, he called his caseworker. The caseworker told him that Tamara had filed a document relinquishing her parental rights and that the foster family, Carol Reeves, no relation, in Marietta, Georgia, had filed for adoption. Raymond had 30 days to contest. He hired a lawyer with money he did not have. The lawyer told him his case was not strong. The lawyer told him the court would prioritize the stability of Daniel's current placement over Raymond's right to contest, given the history of the household. Raymond told the lawyer to file anyway. The lawyer filed. The hearing was scheduled. 2 weeks before the hearing, Raymond's lawyer called him and said the adoption had been finalized on an expedited basis due to a procedural issue with the original filing timeline that Raymond's contest had not suspended in time. Raymond asked the lawyer to say that again. The lawyer said it again. Raymond asked what it meant. The lawyer said, "It means it's done." Raymond Reeves drove his truck to a parking lot on Morse Road that afternoon and sat there until it was dark. He didn't call anyone. He didn't go anywhere. He just sat there. And at some point during those hours, he made a promise, not to a caseworker, not to a lawyer, not to anyone who could write it down, but to himself and to whatever was listening. He will find a way back to him. I don't know what it looks like, but I will find a way. That was 13 years ago. Raymond was still in that parking lot every morning. He had applied to Family Feud on a dare from his co-worker Leon, who had told him he was funny enough to be on television and that he needed to do something besides sit in parking lots. Raymond had laughed. He had applied. He had not expected to be selected. When the selection call came, his first thought, before logistics, before excitement, was maybe Daniel watches this show. It was not a plan. It was the thought of a man who had spent 13 years looking for windows. Carol Reeves had contacted the Family Feud production team 6 weeks before the taping. She had found Raymond through a combination of an old court record, a Facebook profile that hadn't been updated since 2019, and a phone call to a Columbus church that Raymond's original caseworker had mentioned in a document Carol had requested through a records inquiry. It had taken her 4 months. Daniel did not know she was doing it. Daniel did not know his father had applied to be on Family Feud. Daniel did not know his father had spent 13 years in a parking lot on Morse Road. Carol knew all of this because she had made it. Etiquette business to know. The same way she had made it her business to pour orange juice every morning and not ask about the window. Because she understood that loving Daniel completely meant loving the room she wasn't allowed into. She called the production team and said, "I have a story." They listened for 20 minutes. Then they called Raymond. Raymond Reeves sat in his truck in the Morse Road parking lot and took that call. And when the producer finished explaining what Carol had proposed, Raymond did not speak for 41 seconds. The producer said, "Mr. Reeves, are you there?" Raymond said, "Is he okay?" The producer said, "Yes." Raymond said, "Does he know about me?" The producer said, "He knows you exist. His mother told him the truth when he was 12. But he doesn't know you've been looking." Raymond put his hand flat against the windshield. He said, "Okay." One word, "Okay." Was carrying a secret that would soon change everything. Raymond's family played the first 3 rounds without Raymond saying a word about why he was really there. His cousin Marcus, who had driven up from Dayton to be on the team, said later that Raymond had been the calmest he'd ever seen him. Still focused. Almost somewhere else. The family played well. The audience liked them. Steve Harvey liked Raymond immediately. There was something about the way Raymond stood, something deliberate and patient, that Steve later said reminded him of men he'd known who had survived things they didn't talk about. At the end of the 3rd round, Steve moved toward Raymond for the contestant chat segment. He asked Raymond why he'd applied. Raymond looked at Steve for a moment. Then he said, "I'm trying to get back to someone." Steve said, "Who?" Raymond said, "My son. I haven't seen him in 13 years." The studio did not go completely silent immediately. It went quiet gradually, the way a room goes quiet when people are leaning in rather than sitting back. When 200 people are collectively deciding to hold their breath. Steve sighed. "Tell me." Raymond told him. Not all of it. Not the caseworker changes. Not the lost document. Not the lawyer's phone call. It told him the shape of it. Son taken. System closed the door. 13 years of a parking lot, and a photograph and a prayer with his eyes open. He told it in 5 sentences. Then it stopped, and Steve Harvey stood in front of him and did not perform a reaction. He just absorbed it, the way you absorb something that has weight. And the studio was so quiet that the hum of the overhead lights was audible again. Steve sighed, "You still love him." It was not a question. Raymond said, "Every single day." And then Steve Harvey looked at his floor producer, and the floor producer touched his earpiece. And something passed between them that the audience could not hear, and Steve turned back to the audience and said, "I need everyone in this room to stay exactly where they are." The studio fell completely silent. Steve walked to the side of the stage. He came back 30 seconds later. He stood at center stage and looked at Raymond Reeves and said, "Son, turn around. He's here." Raymond Reeves turned around. Daniel Reeves was standing at the back of the studio in a gray hoodie with his hands in the front pocket. He was 17 years old, and he had his father's jawline and his father's stillness, and he was not moving. He had been brought in through the production entrance 4 minutes earlier, while Raymond's family was being given a fake equipment delay explanation. Carol was standing 12 feet to Daniel's left. She had her hand over her mouth. She had been in that studio for 6 minutes and had not been able to look anywhere except at the back of Raymond's head. Raymond Reeves walked the length of that studio floor. The audience did not make a sound. Not one sound. 38 crew members, 200 audience members, every camera on the floor, all of it pointed at a man walking toward a boy he had last held when the boy was 4 years old and weighed 38 pounds, and called him Daddy. Daniel did not move from the back wall. He watched his father walk toward him, and his jaw worked the way jaws work when a person is deciding something. And then Raymond stopped 3 feet in front of him and said, "I looked for you." He never stopped. Daniel's hands came out of the hoodie pocket. He looked at his father's face for a long moment. Then he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "For real home or just visiting home?" Raymond said, "For real home, I promise." Daniel stepped forward, and his father caught him, and the sound that came out of Raymond Reeves in that moment was not a word. It was not crying exactly. It was the sound of 13 years of a parking lot and a photograph and a prayer with open eyes, releasing all at once into the shoulder of a 17-year-old boy in a gray hoodie. And the studio fell so silent around it that 200 people heard every second of it. And 3 camera operators were not operating their cameras anymore. And the sound engineer said later he had turned the gain up on the boom mic because he wanted to make sure the recording caught it. Every bit of it. Because A knew he was recording something that did not happen twice. Steve Harvey stood at center stage with his microphone at his side and his eyes closed. His lips were moving slightly. The wardrobe assistant in the wing said she thought he was praying. When Raymond and Daniel separated, Steve walked toward them. He stopped in front of Raymond and said, "Let me tell you something." He said it to Raymond, but he was speaking to the room. "I made a promise a long time ago. When I was at my lowest, sleeping in my car, not knowing what came next, I told God, if you get me out of this, I will spend the rest of my life helping people who are carrying weight nobody else can see. I made that promise, and I've spent every day since trying to keep it." He looked at Daniel. "Your father kept his promise too. 13 years is a long time to keep a promise to someone who doesn't know you're keeping it." He looked into the camera. "Everyone watching at home, if you are carrying a promise right now that feels like it's going nowhere, that feels like the door is never going to open, I'm telling you." Raymond Reeves sat in a parking lot for 13 years and prayed with his eyes open. And today he is standing in this room with his son. The door opens. It does not always open when you need it to, but it opens. Then he turned to his producers and said, "Get Carol on a microphone." Carol Reeves came to the stage. Steve took her hand and said to the audience, "This woman spent 4 months tracking down a man she had never met so that her son could have his father back. She didn't have to do that. She chose to do that." He looked at Carol. "What made you do it?" Carol looked at Daniel. She sighed. "Because he looks at the window every morning, and I figured out a long time ago that I couldn't be what's on the other side of it. But maybe his dad could." The studio fell completely silent. The call went to the son's adoptive mother, Carol, but she was already there. So Steve called the one person Raymond had never been able to reach, his original Columbus caseworker, now retired, who had handled the initial placement. The production team had located her that morning. Her name was Brenda. She answered on the second ring. Steve said, Brenda, my name is Steve Harvey. I have a man here named Raymond Reeves. I think you might remember him. A pause. Then Brenda said, I remember Raymond. Her voice was careful. Steve said, he's standing next to his son right now. For the first time in 13 years, I thought you should hear that. Another pause. Then Brenda said, very quietly, thank God. Steve held the phone toward Raymond and Daniel. He didn't say anything. He just held it there, so Brenda could hear the room. But Steve wasn't done. The opposing family, the Patterson family from Nashville, had watched all of this from their podium. Their youngest member, a 22-year-old named Darius, walked across the stage without asking and shook Raymond's hand. He didn't say much. He said, man, just man. Raymond laughed. It was the first time he had laughed on that stage, and it was a real laugh, and the audience laughed with him. And something in the room shifted from sacred back toward human, which is sometimes what a laugh is for. Both families played. Both families won. The clip was uploaded on a Thursday evening. By Saturday morning, it had 55 million views. By the following Wednesday, 190 million. The full unedited reunion footage, 14 minutes and 22 seconds, was released 4 days after the initial clip and accumulated 140 million additional views on its own. The hashtag number turnaround trended in 38 countries for 8 consecutive days. Publications in 19 languages ran the story. Family law reform advocates cited the clip in 3 separate legislative hearings on expedited adoption procedures within 90 days of its release. The Turnaround Foundation, incorporated in Ohio and Georgia jointly, launched 60 days after the taping, with a focus on reconnecting biological parents who had lost children to procedural failures in the family court system. In its first year, it processed 890 inquiry cases, successfully facilitated 143 reunifications, and partnered with legal aid organizations in 9 states to provide free representation for parents navigating contested placement reviews. Raymond Reeves was named to the foundation's advisory board. He still drives the same delivery route in Columbus. He drives it differently now. Daniel Reeves graduated high school the following June. Raymond was in the front row. Carol sat next to him. After the ceremony, someone took a photograph of the 3 of them in the school parking lot. Daniel in his cap and gown, Raymond with his hand on Daniel's shoulder, Carol on the other side. And Daniel posted it that night with a caption that said, Real Home. It was shared 2.1 million times before morning. 6 months after the taping, a journalist writing a follow-up story asked Raymond what he did differently now in the mornings. Raymond thought about it. He sighed, I still park in the same lot. Old habits. He paused. But I stopped looking at the photograph. He paused again. I don't need to anymore. I call him instead. There is a kind of love that lives in parking lots and prays with its eyes open and never mistakes absence for ending. There is a kind of love that pours orange juice and watches a child look at a window and quietly builds a bridge to the other side of the glass instead of asking what's there. Raymond Reeves and Carol Reeves, who share nothing but a last name and a boy, built that bridge from opposite ends, and it held and on a Tuesday afternoon in a television studio in Los Angeles. A 17-year-old in a gray hoodie took his hands out of his pocket and stepped forward, and his father caught him. And 13 years of a parking lot closed like a door that had always been meant to open. If this story found you today, subscribe right now and hit the bell. Every week we bring you the stories this world almost forgot to tell. Leave a comment. Have you ever kept a promise for someone who didn't know you were keeping it? Share this with someone who needs to know. The door still opens. The Turnaround Foundation link is in the description below.